Well, I'm here outside the White House where demonstrators are again behind me. In the last few minutes, two very large military vehicles have pushed right up in front of the crowd. The police have also pushed the protesters back up a block so that you can no longer even see the White House behind me, and protesters are no longer allowed to get near that new black fence that the president had erected 2 nights ago. They're desperate, really, for there to be no trouble here after those scenes that we saw where protesters were forcibly removed from outside the White House so controversially 2 nights ago. Just now, as you heard there in the heads, the Defence Secretary, Mark Esper, has come out against the president and said that he does not support the use of active duty military to quell protesters in cities and states where governors cannot get a handle on demonstrations. The president, though, today has reiterated on Fox Radio that he will use military force if need be. He also said that he only went down into the bunker in the White House to check it out, not for any other reason, on Monday evening. He's been criticised, of course, for hiding down there while Washington burned. We are also awaiting any time now this afternoon on the Attorney General in Minnesota, who is due to give an update on the charging of the police in the case against the death of George Floyd. What local reports are saying is that the policeman who has already been charged with 3rd-degree murder, that his charges will be elevated to 2nd-degree murder, while the other 3 police officers will be charged, the reports say, with aiding and abetting 2nd-degree murder. Meanwhile, the lawyer for the family say that by their silence, those 3 other police officers are also culpable.
Black Lives Matter!
If President Trump thought his show of strength and a brand new barrier would keep the protesters at bay, they were determined to show him otherwise. Thousands, by far the largest turnout, gathered outside the White House throughout the day, repeating the name of the black man killed at the knee of a white police officer that so ruptured America.
Say his name! Say his name!
The protesters are rattling President Trump's new wall here, as you can see behind me. The police, though, largely ignoring them and staying back there behind the line. And the protesters are self-policing. If anyone throws a bottle or acts up in any way, pretty much immediately up come the chants of peaceful protest.
This man shouted angrily at another to stop shaking the fence. And listen to the reaction earlier in the day when one protester climbed a traffic light and ripped down the road sign. Protests were largely peaceful too across the country. In LA, hundreds marched through the streets and then came to kneel alongside police.
Yo, march beside us! March beside us! March beside us! Let the revolution be televised! March beside us!
And one woman even persuaded the National Guard to the ground.
Thank you! Thank you!
But those scenes of unity were marred by pockets of violence elsewhere. In Seattle, police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse demonstrators. While in New York, even the healthcare workers, still in the throes of treating patients with COVID-19, stole a moment to step out and support passing protesters. They were taking no chances in Washington, D.C. A heavy presence of guards lined the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. But demonstrators took their message to the president's front door, face down on the ground, with arms as if in handcuffs to echo the last moments of George Floyd's life. These women scrawled the phone number of lawyers to call in case of arrest.
If you get arrested and you want to be accounted for, write this number down. This number will account for you and put you in touch with pro bono legal services. I hope that this generation can be the time where we can wake up and stay awake and move forward in a way that everybody else understands. stand up for something. But once everybody calms down and we're able to have a lot of community organizers, activists, and the like come together and really figure out what are we out here for? Why are we angry? What do we want everything to look like after this?
Black people are disproportionately murdered every day in this country. We're protesting because these are some of the cases that are actually caught on camera. Can you even imagine how many are not filmed? How many police get away with this? Before social media, before everyone had a camera in their pocket, this is not new.
I'm here because I have every right to be here. We are all here because we have a right to be here, and we have a right to protest. We have a right to demand better for our kids, for our families, and for the Black brothers and sisters who have died at the hands of the police.
This kid is the 6-year-old daughter of George Floyd, Gianna, here with her mother, Floyd's former partner, who gave this emotional appeal.
He will never see her grow up, graduate. He will never walk her down the aisle. If it's a problem she's having and she needs her dad, she does not have that anymore.
It's that message that they want him behind his fence to hear. Another black life lost. And on the wall next to the White House, a question almost everyone in this country is asking. Why do we have to keep telling you Black Lives Matter?
Well, here, thousands of people have marched through central London as a show of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. They chanted, "We will not be silent," and "I can't breathe," as they marched from Hyde Park towards Whitehall. Organisers appealed for people to spread out as the sheer size of the crowds made social distancing almost impossible. Our reporter Simeon Brown is in Parliament Square. Simeon.
Today felt like a real cultural moment in the UK. And although it was undoubtedly sparked by a death in America, protesters say they're just as concerned about racial inequality right here. They spoke about disproportionate policing and raised a number of cases of deaths in custody. They also mentioned the quality of opportunity, that they felt it was not possible here along the lines of race. There was even concerns about the Windrush scandal. There was real anger and fury from both black and white millennials and teenagers here on the streets today in their thousands. The question is, were they just exercising anger, or is this the beginning of a real political moment? In the midst of a deadly pandemic, these congested crowds are protesting what they say is another just as fatal. There are not supposed to be any gatherings happening anywhere in the country right now. And there are thousands and thousands of people, young people, who are here today. The name that they're calling is George Floyd, but that's not the only name that they're mentioning. They're mentioning UK cases too. There's as much anger about what's happening in the US as there is here in the UK. But what you can see here is more than just solidarity with African American victims of police violence. This is about inequality closer to home.
How many problems that's happening in the UK, just because it's not as spoken about or it's not in the media as much because it's so ingrained in the system, doesn't mean it's not happening here.
There's racism everywhere, and if you are quiet, you are supporting them. You are supporting them, so come outside and do something.
At times, the fury threatened to spark. These officers were chased off. But organisers demanded discipline in response. No violence, no riots, they said. As tens of thousands of young adults and teenagers as young as 13 marched on Parliament.
I think that everyone coming together and, fighting for justice is such a beautiful thing to see. People from all walks of life.
I'm just happy that something is finally being done about it, and we're all trying to push this movement further.
Take a knee. Take a knee.
Outside Parliament, leading the resistance, is Star Wars A-lister John Boyega.
Today is an important day. We're fighting for our rights. We're fighting for our ability to live in freedom. We're fighting for our ability to achieve. We're fighting for our options in life to be of quality. And today, you guys are a physical representation of that.
There are still meant to be restrictions on large gatherings, but here the police took a healthy distance. The Prime Minister asked protesters to do the same.
All I would say is that I do think people have a right to protest, to make their feelings known about injustices such as as what happened to George Floyd, I would urge people to protest peacefully and in accordance with the rules on social distancing.
The peaceful protest began to fray, but not for long. The day ended in the spirit of how it started. Now, today's protests come as new figures show that in London, black and brown minorities were more likely to be arrested under coronavirus laws. And when there's so much discontent over the sheer number of black and brown deaths, this mood seen here today is not going anywhere anytime soon.
Simeon Brown in Westminster. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Tara Setmeyer, who's a former communications strategist for the Republican Party. Tara, are you still a Republican?
At this point, I have not completely denounced the party, only because at some point the ilk that has taken over the party, that is Trumpism, will have to be purged. And when it's time to rebuild the party from the destruction of Trump, I want to be a part of that rebuilding process. But it is not an easy decision to maintain an affiliation with a party that I don't recognize anymore.
What is going on with those people who are defending the president from black communities?
This is a decades-long problem inside the Republican Party. I recently wrote an op-ed, co-authored it with a fellow senior advisor at the Lincoln Project about this, how the GOP has got to stop pandering to racism and has to acknowledge its role in this country in that respect, of turning a blind eye, sometimes even sowing that kind of discord in order to maintain political power in certain regions of the United States. And the chickens have come home to roost now. And it's frankly embarrassing that so many Republicans who claim to be the party of Lincoln would continue to excuse this president's behavior, his inflammatory words, his brute force and overuse of military power, an absolute despicable behavior that he's displayed at a time when the American people are desperately looking for leadership.
But do you think there is a political solution for black people in America that is on offer? And will black people unite around it?
I absolutely. There's an alternative. We have an election coming up this year, and the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, has a proven record of being a friend to the African-American community. He was Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years. His record in public service has been one that's supportive of the issues that are important to Black America. And there could not be a clearer choice in November. So yes, I think that you can still be confident that there are ways to be able to exercise your political power, but we need to make sure that we have a free and fair election, that all voting is legally and available to as many people as possible, and be careful of voter suppression efforts that are coming in, not only domestically, but also foreign influence to try to suppress the vote, particularly in the Black community. We need to be very careful of that.
Right, but why should black voters believe that changing the president would change anything about what's happened, given what's happened after 8 years of having a black president?
Well, it doesn't only start at the national level, it also starts at a local level. And the best way to not only have your voice heard through protest, peaceful protest, is also to, in America, they still work for us. Your elected officials are responsible to the people who put them there. So the best way to effectuate change is to make sure there are people who are representative of your beliefs in your community. And that can be done. Has enough been done? No. Has progress been made? Yes. Is there more to be done? Absolutely. But now, as you see large numbers of people, both white and black, rising up in righteous anger, I think you're going to see things done. Just like you saw with the change in handover in Congress in 2018, the American people are just fed up. They're fed up with this. And I think that there are many people in Black America who may not have been active before, but they're activated now and will use their political power to change things.
But politically, couldn't this actually end up helping Trump? He was in the middle of a crisis over coronavirus and the horrific number of deaths in the United States, many of whom, a disproportionate number of whom, come from ethnic minorities in the black community. And all of that has been taken away from the media, from people's attention, and replaced with this, which he is portraying as a law and order issue, a terror issue, and His supporters will love it, won't they?
Well, his supporters will love it, but his supporters are not the majority of the American people. Donald Trump's approval rating is below 40%. It's tanking in states that he needs. We don't have a national election. We have, individual state elections in our electoral college. And in the states that he needs, he's not doing well. I think the difference between his law and order approach, which is straight out of the playbook from Nixon in 1968 in the shadow of the civil rights era, the difference is Nixon wasn't an incumbent president. He didn't have a record to run on, whereas Donald Trump does. And he has shown who he is. He's shown that he's unfit. And he has also shown that he is unwilling to represent all Americans. If he wants to be the president of the MAGA contingent, then he can do that as a private citizen.
Just very briefly, do you think he will sack his defense secretary for defying him?
I think that it's very possible. Fealty and loyalty is the only thing that Donald Trump cares about. It's not about doing the right thing. It's not about upholding the law. It's not about upholding the Constitution. We saw that with the Mueller investigation. Donald Trump is uninterested in that. He's interested only in fealty. And people who step out and actually speak the truth and stand up for the Constitution and stand up for what's right have no place in a Donald Trump administration. So I would frankly say that Secretary Esper should have resigned anyway. He had no business being a part of that political display on Monday. That was despicable, and no defense secretary should be involved in something that political. Neither should the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley. That was shameful. But he should have resigned just from that. The fact that he came out, I'm sure that there were many flag officers and the officer corps in the military that said that were very upset with what Secretary Esper did. So on both ends, he needs to go.